In the vast expanse of the universe, where stars burn in the endless black, ancient beings and powerful civilizations have risen and fallen. Across the cosmos, entire galaxies swirl, each home to unimaginable worlds and untold stories. But despite its endless possibilities, there was one rule that every living being, no matter how advanced, knew to follow. The universe had only one unbreakable command: do not disturb the humans. For centuries, this rule had been respected, revered, and feared by all who knew of it. It was simple, yet powerful, and no one dared to break it. The humans, a seemingly fragile species from a small blue planet, were a mystery to many. They were not the strongest, nor the most technologically advanced, but there was something about them that made the universe's oldest races shudder with fear. No one knew what would happen if the rule was broken, but legends whispered of a force so powerful it could reshape the fabric of existence. No alien civilization, no matter how ancient or advanced, had ever dared to provoke humanity. The risk was too great, but not everyone respected the rule. Far beyond the reach of Earth, in a galaxy governed by ancient laws and order, a powerful group of intergalactic beings known as the Zarkar Empire began to take notice of Earth. They were a race of beings with technology and knowledge that far surpassed anything humanity had ever imagined. Their empire spanned hundreds of star systems, and they had conquered countless worlds. They believed they understood the universe better than anyone, and they had lived for eons, unchallenged in their dominance. To the Zarkars, the humans were an insignificant species, one that had long been ignored. They had watched from the shadows as Earth slowly evolved, paying little attention to the rise of the human race. But the Zarkar Empire had begun to grow restless. They were eager to expand, to push their influence further into the unknown corners of the universe. And as they explored, they stumbled upon Earth, a planet on the brink of technological evolution, but still primitive enough to be of no concern. In their arrogance, the Zarkars made a decision. They believed the humans were no threat. In fact, they considered them to be weak and unworthy of any special attention. They concluded that there was nothing to fear from such a simple race. The humans had no advanced weapons, no grand armies, no ancient secrets. So they decided to break the one rule that had kept them at bay for centuries. The Zarkars would wake the humans. They would show them their place in the grand scheme of the universe. It was, after all, just a small planet, a tiny speck in the vast cosmic web. How could the humans possibly challenge the might of the Zarkar Empire? And so, with an air of indifference, they reached out to Earth. They would make contact. They would reveal their presence. They would let the humans know they were no longer alone in the universe. But in their eagerness, the Zarkars made the deadliest mistake of all. They had forgotten the most crucial rule of the universe. The humans were not to be disturbed. The moment the Zarkars reached out to Earth, something stirred deep within humanity. A force awoke, a primal, ancient power that had been dormant for centuries. The humans, though unaware of their own potential, were now part of something far greater than they had ever imagined. As the Zarkars watched in disbelief, they realized they had made a grave error. The humans were not as powerless as they had thought. They had broken the universe's deadliest rule. And now, they would have to face the consequences. It was too late to turn back. The humans had awoken, and they were not going to stand by quietly as their world was threatened. The Zarkars had underestimated them. Now, the universe would watch as the humans, small and fragile as they were, rose to challenge the most powerful force in the galaxy. The rule had been broken, and the universe would never be the same again. The moment the Zarkars' influence touched the planet, something remarkable happened, something no one, not even the Zarkar Empire, had anticipated. The humans stirred. At first, it was only a whisper, a subtle change in the air. But soon it grew. Like the first tremor before an earthquake, the awakening spread slowly, then rapidly. Across Earth, people began to feel it. It wasn't just an ordinary shift in the atmosphere. It was something far deeper, something primal. It was as if the universe itself was speaking to them. For those sensitive enough, the very air seemed charged with a strange energy, something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. The first signs were subtle. Children began to dream strange dreams, filled with images of distant stars and galaxies. Scientists, already on the brink of extraordinary discoveries, found themselves suddenly overwhelmed by bursts of insight and knowledge, as though their minds had been unlocked. For days, many experienced vivid, unexplainable visions, flashes of light, and fragments of languages they couldn't decipher. But even more shocking than the dreams were the feelings that accompanied them, the sensation of power, of awakening potential, something they had never before recognized within themselves. While some dismissed it as a collective mass hysteria, others began to notice strange phenomena. People who had never been able to solve complex problems suddenly did so effortlessly. Soldiers, once restricted to conventional warfare tactics, began to develop a deeper understanding of strategy and leadership. Ordinary civilians displayed remarkable ingenuity in the face of danger. It wasn't just human intellect that had been affected, it was their very essence. The dormant, untapped force that resided deep within humanity, a force forgotten by the ages, was beginning to awaken. And with this awakening came something even more profound, the desire to fight, to protect, and to preserve. The Zarkers, meanwhile, were still unaware of what they had set in motion. To them, humanity was still just an insignificant species. They continued their preparations, assuming that they could easily manipulate Earth's governments, make contact with the human leaders, and impose their will. They sent emissaries, messengers who would communicate their intentions, the first step in asserting their dominance. However, the humans, now awakened in ways the Zarkers could not comprehend, weren't as easy to control as they had expected. The first of the Zarkar emissaries arrived in a shimmering ship that descended from the stars, their advanced technology visible to all who looked up. They landed in a remote desert, sending shockwaves through local media, their arrival marking the beginning of humanity's confrontation with the unknown. Governments quickly responded, attempting to negotiate, to understand the alien visitors. However, the Zarkers misjudged the human response. The emissaries, believing the humans to be primitive, approached Earth's leaders with condescension. They spoke in tones of superiority, offering humanity an ultimatum: submit to the will of the Zarkar Empire, and the planet would prosper under their rule, or resist and face annihilation. They spoke as if humans had no choice, as if their survival was dependent on alien intervention. But the humans, now awakened, did not react with fear. They did not cower in the face of these seemingly powerful invaders. Instead, they responded with something that surprised the Zarkars: defiance. The world's leaders, rather than yielding, began to unite in a way they had never before. Nations set aside their differences, and for the first time in history, humanity stood together in the face of a common threat. This unity sparked something extraordinary. As the humans began to mobilize, they began to understand what had changed within them. It was as if their minds had been sharpened, their bodies strengthened, and their spirits ignited by the very force that the Zarkars had unknowingly awakened. The humans now knew they were not as powerless as they had once believed. They were capable of far more than anyone had ever thought possible. The sudden surge in human potential was nothing short of miraculous. The Zarkars, who had assumed that they were in full control, began to notice the shift. The humans, though not yet equipped with the advanced weapons or technology of the aliens, had started to retaliate. Their first response was strategic, a form of resistance that combined their collective human will and emerging scientific knowledge in unexpected ways. They may not have had the technology to match the Zarkars' advanced weapons, but they had something the aliens did not: creativity, resourcefulness, and an unyielding desire to protect their home. In every major city, from New York to Beijing, from Moscow to Cairo, the human response began to take shape. Small groups of scientists, military leaders, and ordinary citizens began working together, sharing knowledge and strategizing. They tapped into resources they never realized they had, knowledge hidden within ancient texts, forgotten technologies, and even the human mind itself. Humanity wasn't just waking up. They were beginning to evolve into something greater than their former selves. The Zarkers began to realize that they had made a grave mistake. What they thought would be a simple conquest of a backward species had turned into a battle with an unexpected and formidable force. The humans were not only surviving, they were fighting back. They were no longer the defenseless beings the Zarkers had believed them to be. Humanity's survival instinct had kicked in, and now the universe would have to reckon with the rise of a species once considered weak, but now more powerful than anyone could have imagined. The universe had made a grave error by breaking its only rule. And now it would learn that the humans, awakened from their slumber, were not about to go down without a fight. The Zarkers, having underestimated humanity, could not have anticipated the speed and intensity of the human response. They had expected a planet of disorganized, weak creatures, easy to subdue and manipulate. But what they faced was an entirely different force, one that was beginning to shift the balance of power in the universe. The first true clash came unexpectedly. A Zarkar ship, a massive, shimmering vessel designed to intimidate and strike fear, descended over Earth's skies. The message was clear. The time for negotiation was over. The Zarkers would take what they wanted by force, and humanity would be given no choice but to submit. But as the ship hovered, radiating an energy that could melt steel, the humans stood ready. Though they had no comparable technology, they had something far more dangerous: the element of surprise. From the moment the Zarkar emissary made its presence known, humans across the globe mobilized. Military forces scrambled to coordinate their responses, but it wasn't just the soldiers that stood ready to fight. It was every human. The collective awakening had brought an unparalleled sense of unity and purpose. People from all walks of life, from scientists to farmers, from students to doctors, all knew that this was a defining moment in their history. The time for passivity was over. Humanity was ready to defend its home. In the heart of every major city, people took to the streets, not in fear, but in preparation. Governments called for a united front, urging every citizen to contribute in any way they could. New networks of communication were established, as people shared information and strategies in real time. Ordinary people who had never touched a weapon were now learning to operate advanced defense systems. Even those without formal training were using their creativity and resourcefulness to come up with innovative ways to counter the Zarkars' technological advantage. The world's greatest minds, now united, began working tirelessly to find ways to resist the impending invasion. But despite their growing unity and ingenuity, the first encounter was chaotic. The Zarkars launched their attack with devastating force, unleashing powerful energy beams that tore through the landscape, leveling entire cities in moments. Their weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, designed to eradicate, to wipe out, to dominate. They had no interest in negotiation. They believed that humanity's resistance would crumble in the face of their might. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Zarkars might be right. As their ships unleashed chaos, humanity's forces struggled to hold their ground. The human military, though brave and determined, was outclassed. Fighter jets and tanks were no match for the sheer power of the Zarkar technology. Cities fell, civilians fled, and it seemed as though all hope was lost. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, humanity did not back down. A shift began to occur, subtle at first, but undeniable. The humans, although lacking advanced weapons, were fighting with a fury that the Zarkars had not prepared for. The human spirit, long underestimated, proved to be an unstoppable force. What the Zarkars hadn't accounted for was the unpredictability of human ingenuity and the deep, unshakable bond that connected the people of Earth. Every loss fueled their desire to fight harder. Every fallen city became a rallying cry, an unspoken vow that the Zarkars would never take Earth without a fight. In the midst of the chaos, A breakthrough came when a group of engineers and military strategists, working in an underground bunker, discovered a way to counteract the Zarkers' energy-based weapons. They used the very technology the Zarkers had believed to be beyond the reach of humanity's understanding and turned it against them. A massive EMP burst was set off, disrupting the Zarkers' advanced systems. The attackers, so confident in their superiority, were suddenly caught off guard. Their ships faltered, their weapons malfunctioned, and for the first time, the tide began to turn in humanity's favor. But the victory was short-lived. The Zarkers, realizing that their initial attack had failed, retaliated with even more force. They unleashed a brutal counteroffensive, sending in reinforcements and deploying advanced weapons that the humans could not even begin to comprehend. The human forces were pushed to their limits, and cities that had once been bustling with life were now reduced to rubble. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the human resistance never faltered. The sheer will of the human race, the determination to protect their home, became the driving force behind every action. People, some of them ordinary citizens who had never seen combat, now fought alongside soldiers in the streets, using whatever resources they could find to push back the invaders. The Zarkers were dealing with something they had never encountered before. An enemy that could not be crushed, an enemy that refused to surrender. The war was no longer just about military tactics. It was about survival. It was about the survival of a species that had been underestimated by the most powerful forces in the universe. The first encounter between the Zarkers and humanity had been brutal, chaotic, and filled with loss. But it was also a turning point. Humanity was no longer the passive, fragile species that the Zarkers had once believed them to be. They were a force to be reckoned with. And now, the Zarkers would face the full wrath of the human spirit, a wrath that would prove to be far more dangerous than any weapon they had ever known. Humanity, though battered and bruised, was only just beginning to fight back. The universe had made a deadly mistake by waking the humans, and now the consequences were becoming painfully clear. The humans, bruised but not broken, had experienced the taste of war. It had been a bitter lesson, one filled with loss, destruction, and sorrow. Yet, as the final remnants of the first wave of Zarkar invaders began to retreat, a new fire ignited within humanity, a fire fueled by vengeance and the burning desire to defend their world. The Zarkars had come expecting an easy conquest, but they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future, for the legacy of every person who had fallen, and for the very soul of their planet. The global response had been nothing short of extraordinary. In every corner of the Earth, humans who had once lived ordinary lives now found themselves becoming warriors. The idea of fighting for survival was no longer abstract, it was personal. The loss of loved ones, the destruction of homes, and the brutality of the Zarkar assault had forged a collective resolve that was indomitable. No longer would humanity wait for someone to come to their aid. They would stand on their own 2 feet and strike back, and they would do it with everything they had. In the shadow of their first defeat, humanity began to rebuild. But this was not mere recovery, it was preparation. Nations, once fractured by differences, had come together in unprecedented unity. The fight against the Zarkars was no longer something isolated to military forces. It was a global endeavor. Scientists, engineers, and innovators from all walks of life began working together to develop new technologies, adapting what they had learned from their first encounters. The collective mind of humanity, sparked by the desperation of survival, became a wellspring of innovation. One of the first breakthroughs was the creation of a new type of energy shield. Combining human ingenuity with the remnants of Zarkar technology, engineers designed a defensive barrier that could withstand the powerful energy blasts the invaders had used so effectively. It was a game changer. Suddenly, human forces could engage the Zarkars on equal footing, repelling their weapons and buying humanity the time they needed to regroup. At the same time, humanity's military forces, now better organized and equipped, began launching counterattacks. Small, specialized task forces, composed of both soldiers and civilians, mounted surprise raids on Zarkar supply lines, striking their vulnerable points. These guerrilla tactics, designed to hit the invaders where they were weakest, were devastatingly effective. For every alien supply convoy destroyed, for every Zarkar outpost decimated, the message was clear. The humans were no longer passive victims. They were a formidable adversary, capable of striking deep into enemy territory. The Zarkars, who had underestimated humanity's resourcefulness and resolve, now found themselves on the defensive. They had come to Earth expecting to impose their will on a planet of primitives, but they had awakened a species capable of adapting, evolving, and fighting back with unrelenting force. The tide of the war was beginning to shift, and the Zarkars, for the first time, were beginning to fear what they had unleashed. As the war raged on, humanity's leaders came together to form a unified command, a global coalition dedicated to fighting back against the Zarkar invaders. The world's military assets were pooled together, and a coordinated assault was launched against the alien forces. This time, humanity would not be caught off guard. This time, they would strike back with everything they had. The first major offensive was a coordinated assault on a Zarkar stronghold in the heart of a major city. Using a combination of advanced weaponry, new defensive technologies, and the sheer willpower of the human spirit, the assault tore through the alien defenses. The Zarkars, caught by surprise, were forced to retreat. But the humans, emboldened by their success, were relentless. They pursued the retreating invaders, cutting off their escape routes and dismantling their remaining strongholds one by one. But the most powerful weapon humanity possessed wasn't in its technology, it was in its spirit. The Zarkars, who had relied on their superior technology and vast numbers, could not comprehend the sheer fury that humanity brought to the battlefield. It wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for pride, for honor, and for the very survival of the human race. The Zarkars, no matter how advanced, could not break that spirit. Humanity's revenge was not just about winning a battle, it was about sending a message to the universe. Never underestimate the humans. The Zarkars had come to Earth with their arrogance, believing that their technology and experience would make short work of humanity. But they had underestimated the power of human resilience, creativity, and unity. Now, as humanity's forces pushed deeper into Zarkar territory, the invaders began to realize they had made a fatal mistake. The more humanity fought, the stronger they became. They began to unlock even greater potential within themselves, tapping into ancient knowledge that had been hidden for millennia. Long-forgotten technologies, once thought to be lost, were rediscovered. The humans, using the very same technology the Zarkars had once seen as their edge, began to turn it against their invaders. It was no longer just a war of weapons, it was a war of ideas, a war of spirit. The Zarkars, now on the back foot, began to fear the humans in a way they had never feared any other species. Their empire, once so vast and unchallenged, was beginning to crumble under the weight of humanity's relentless pursuit. The universe had made a terrible mistake by awakening the humans, and now, the consequences of that mistake were unfolding in ways that no one could have predicted. As humanity's forces continued to push back the Zarkars, the message was clear. Earth was not a planet to be dominated, and the humans were not a species to be trifled with. The universe would soon learn that the greatest mistake of all was not just waking the humans, it was believing they could be defeated. Humanity's revenge was far from over. It had only just begun. And the universe was about to witness the full might of a species that refused to surrender. The war between humanity and the Zarkars had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a simple struggle for survival had turned into a battle that would shape the future of the entire galaxy. With each passing day, humanity's resistance grew stronger, its tactics more refined. What the Zarkars had once seen as a quick conquest had now transformed into a prolonged and painful war. But they had no choice but to press on, their pride and empire at stake. The humans, it seemed, were not only surviving, they were winning. The final confrontation loomed on the horizon. After months of relentless fighting, the Zarkars had retreated to their last stronghold, a heavily fortified command center located on one of Earth's distant continents. This was their final bastion, their last chance to crush the human uprising once and for all. But the Zarkars had miscalculated. They had never accounted for the human will to fight, to rise up against overwhelming odds. Now, with humanity unified like never before, their resolve was unbreakable. The battle for the Zarkar stronghold would be the most devastating yet. The Zarkars had thrown everything they had into defending their last remaining stronghold. Their ships, brimming with weaponry, hovered above, their powerful energy shields shimmering like a barrier between them and the rest of the world. The ground forces, enhanced by technology beyond human comprehension, were ready to defend their empire at all costs. But humanity was ready. This time, they would bring everything they had. Across the world, every nation, every group, and every individual had rallied to this final cause. The human forces had grown exponentially stronger, now equipped with advanced weapons and technology that had been scavenged from the wreckage of previous battles and reverse-engineered to match Zarkar technology. But more importantly, humanity's greatest strength had evolved. Their unity. They no longer fought as individual nations or as disconnected groups. They fought as one. The first strike came from space. A coalition of human spacecraft, equipped with the latest defensive and offensive technologies, descended on the Zarkar stronghold in a stunning coordinated attack. The humans' new energy weapons tore through the alien defenses with deadly precision. Zarkar ships attempted to retaliate, but their advanced shields were no match for the ingenuity and adaptability of the humans. For the first time in the entire conflict, the Zarkars found themselves on the back foot, their seemingly invincible technology failing them. On the ground, humanity's elite forces, composed of soldiers, scientists, engineers, and civilians, stormed the Zarkar stronghold with a fury that shook the very earth beneath their feet. They moved with precision, their every action orchestrated to perfection. No longer did they rely on brute force alone. They had learned from their mistakes, utilizing guerrilla tactics, deception, and innovation to outmaneuver the alien forces. Inside the stronghold, the Zarkars fought desperately to protect their last line of defense. But the human forces were relentless. They breached the outer walls, cutting through the alien defenses with a combination of brute strength and tactical genius. The Zarkars, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves fighting for their very survival. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were paying the price. But the Zarkars were not going to go down without a final desperate attempt to turn the tide. In a last-ditch effort, they activated their most powerful weapon, their ultimate weapon, designed to annihilate entire civilizations in one fell swoop. It was a weapon capable of destroying not only Earth, but entire star systems. The Zarkars hoped that by using this weapon, they could wipe out humanity once and for all. As the weapon powered up, the Zarkars thought they had finally secured their victory. But humanity, ever resourceful, had one last surprise in store. Using the knowledge they had gained throughout the war, the humans launched a daring mission to disable the Zarkar weapon. They infiltrated the heart of the stronghold, making their way through its defenses and directly into the chamber housing the weapon. It was a perilous journey, one that would cost them dearly, but their determination was unwavering. In a moment that would define the fate of the entire human race, the humans successfully disabled the weapon just seconds before it could unleash its destructive power. The Zarkars' ultimate weapon, the weapon they had relied upon to win the war, was rendered useless. The humans had won. Against all odds, they had defeated the invincible Zarkars and saved their planet from total annihilation. But the victory came at a heavy cost. The battle had left Earth scared, cities destroyed, and millions of lives lost. Yet, amidst the devastation, humanity stood triumphant, not just because they had survived, but because they had proven something far more important. They had proven that no matter how powerful an enemy may seem, no matter how insurmountable the odds, the human spirit was stronger. They had proven that they were capable of far more than anyone had ever imagined, and that the universe had made the deadliest mistake by underestimating them. As the dust settled and the final Zarkar forces were driven from Earth, the remaining invaders realized the full weight of their error. They had come to Earth thinking they could impose their will on a helpless species, but they had learned that humanity was no mere prey. The humans had fought back with everything they had, and in doing so, they had secured their place as one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy. The Zarkars, their empire in ruins, retreated into the depths of space, their pride shattered. The universe, once convinced of humanity's insignificance, now saw them for what they truly were, a force to be reckoned with. The universe would never forget the lesson it had learned. The humans were not to be trifled with. And as humanity looked toward the future, they knew that the universe had changed forever. The Zarkars had awakened the humans, but they had also awakened something else, something that would ensure no one ever dared to challenge humanity again. The universe had made a deadly mistake by underestimating the humans, and now it would forever know their power.